off the goose, thinking that I'm too pop, getting caught with a few thoughts, cause I'm too lost. Off, speakers can't even handle me, giving what I got, nobody's gonna drain my energy, and I will never stop, I'm motivated by enemies, setting up shop, so everybody remember me.
Hello guys, and welcome to the third part of the history of Italian cuisine. In first and second part we looked at Roman's origins and the early medieval and Renaissance relationship of Italian with food. In particular, we discovered that the rich and powerful of Italy's most influenced cities, from Florence to Rome, from Ferrara to Venice, used food as a means to show their wealth and position, but also to exorcise the natural fear of hunger and death, which was so much intertwined with life in Europe up to the modern era. Let's see the history of Italian cuisine in the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries. More on how Italy became the cradle of good food and conviviality. We have also seen that in spite of great efforts placed in proposing astonishing dishes, it was the desire to surprise rather than a wish to create a gastronomic tradition, to inspire Italian chefs. With the coming of the Renaissance, however, the first sign of a national cuisine appeared, especially thanks to figures such as that of Chef Massibugo in Ferrara. The Renaissance also had the merit to introduce new cooking methods and ingredients on Italian tables, as well as creating standards to follow when it came to table manners. It is from these centuries that the worldwide famous gelato by Consignor della Casa was born. What not many people know is that in fact della Casa took a lot of his ideas from the old Latin text on the topic. Even Cato wrote about manners in his own time. Essential when it comes to what Italians actually ate in the Renaissance is the role of literature. If it is true that historians had kept track of what happened at banquets and who attended them, dishes and flavors were the realms of the arts. History of Italian cuisine in the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries. For instance, we got to know from the I.L. Baldus and Le Maccherone text reminiscence in content and style of the better-known works of Rabelais by Teofilio Folengo, that in the 16th century Mantunas were fond of chestnut polenta, soups made with bread and beans, or chickpeas and peas. The mariconda, still a typical dish of the area today, was popular on feast days. It consists of a mixture of eggs, cheese and breadcrumbs, boiled in a broth. Italian classic, such pappardelle, also hail from Renaissance times, just as potato gnocchi, macaroni and tagliatelle do. Gnocchi in particular may have Roman origins, but the first written attestation of their presence on Italian tables comes from 15th century text. We are talking about simple yet well-balanced cuisine, in which meat barely appeared. Even so, it was certainly more of a fixture on the table of the wealthier. We have discussed the enormous influence the discovery of America had on Italian dishes and cooking habits, especially with the introduction of the tomato culture, which promoted the diffusion of most quintessential of all Italian recipes, the pasta al pomodoro. The history of Italian cuisine in 17th and 18th century. The love story between tomato and pasta, the dried version created by the Arabs and popular in Italy since the early Middle Ages, began sometimes in the 17th century, thanks to the works and inventive of Trapani's longshoremen who used to boil the pasta, usually spaghetti or macaroni, drain it and add chopped tomatoes on top. Shortly after, Neapolitans would grow tomatoes to make pumarola. About 100 years later, vermicelli with pumarola was already the staple dish for a large chunk of southern Italians. An icon of Italian cuisine was definitely born. A curiosity, even if, as we said, dried pasta entered Italian kitchens, very early as the Neapolitans were to adopt it. In the, in the 18th century, as their staple dish, in the centuries in between pasta wasn't commonly consumed. Up to the 17th century, people from Naples were known as mangiafolie, which means leaves eaters, because of their large consumption of vegetables. Vermicelli arrived in the city's streets only after 1647 and the revolt of Masaniello. It is then that Neapolitans became mania macaroni, pasta eaters. The history of Italian cuisine in the 17th, 18th and 19th century were much coincident with that of European cuisine as a whole. Italy was the country to follow when it came to food and culinary tradition. Things began to change in the middle of the 17th century when France entered powerfully the game of food and flavors, becoming Italy's first rival, a rivalry still extant today. The 17th century then as a moment of a stall, in a way for the popularity of Italian cuisine abroad, but also a moment of the definition of what Italian cuisine really is. Up to then, chefs and stewards had tried to create a national, pan-regional ideal of cuisine, which comprised elements of each area and region of the peninsula. The 19th century, on the other hand, signed the coming up on the stage of regional cuisines and of the celebration of all their differences. In a way, it is with this acknowledgement that modern Italian culinary tradition was born, unity within the variety. Mind you, Italian cuisine produced some true culinary legend in the 17th century. Did you know that one of our most famous desserts, tiramisu, may hail from those years? Some people believe, in fact, that the first tiramisu-like dessert had been created in Treviso sometime in 17th century by a famous chef whose restaurant was next door to a brothel. Well, as the dessert was considered an aphrodisiac, it used to be served to the brothel's clients, so that they could often perform better once they met their ladies. Or so does the legend say, of course. In truth, there are other versions relating the story of tiramisu, which is certainly one of the most famous Italian desserts. Funnily enough, they all hail from different regions, creating a pretty entertaining regional dispute over the birth of this delicious cake, very much as it happens when it comes to another famous Italian treat, Torrone. Tuscany also claims to be the fatherland of tiramisu, served for the first time in the 17th century at the court of Duke Leopold de' Medici of Tuscany. He liked it so much that dessert became known as zuppa del duca, the duke's pudding. Just as in the Trevisan version of the story, the cake was believed to be an aphrodisiac and hence got the cheeky name it has today. Bring me to the skies. It isn't over. Piedmontese believes tiramisu was created in the 19th century in Turin to honor, to cheer up, a much tired Count Cavour after the diplomatic and military hardships caused by unification of the country. Nothing better than its creamy, sweet, yet energizing flavor to pamper the soul and the body of the political father of untitled Italy. And like any well-crafted Italian tale, here comes the plot twist. In spite of the original diatribes based on textual attestations of the desert in the areas at the times mentioned, the actual recipe of tiramisu, as we know it today, was only published in the cooking book in the 1970s. Is tiramisu in the end a child of the 20th century, just as we are? Whichever the origin, we're talking Italian cuisine nobility here, getting more into the history of Italian cuisine in the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries. 19th centuries food in Italy. This is a crucial moment in the history of the country, and so is it in the history of Italian cuisine. It is the century what witnesses the birth of Italy as a whole country, and also that of what is still considered today a seminal Italian cuisine recipe book, the Artrusi. More of it in a second. The 19th century is also the time when scientific research changed people's eating habits the most. Yes, people spoke about food then, but more from a scientific rather than culinary point of view. The development of machines and use of organic fertilizers increased agricultural production, which resulted in a lowering of prices and in higher accessibility to food for many. The improvement of communications with the creation of an ever-growing rail system and the adoption of naval transport made it possible for products to reach all areas of the country more effectively and considerably faster. Moreover, the celerity of transport also allowed for fresh products such as meat and cheeses to be delivered everywhere with ease. Sterilization for food containers was ideated by Nicolas Appert and pasteurization by Louis Pasteur around 1880. More staple dishes of Italian cuisine were developed in the 19th century, some of them with a more mysterious history than others. But let's start with something we are sure about, the history behind pesto and pizza. Pesto is symbol of the city of Genoa and of Liguria as a whole. Has found popularity in its current form in the 19th century, even though basil-based recipes were in use apparently as early as 11th century. The story goes that Genoa as a warlord Giuliano Embrico, along with many others from the city, participated in the First Crusade, providing support for the conquest of Jerusalem. Captain Bartolomeo Deco was a member of Embrico's army and fascinated by the scent and use of basil in the Middle East. He brought some seeds of the plant back to Genoa, where he began growing it for its medical uses. After a while, he discovered basil has pretty good to eat, especially when ground with a mortar and mixed with some local extra virgin olive oil. However, the recipe as we know it today, with ground pine nuts and parmesan or pecorino, was refined only in the 19th century. This is the highlight of the story of Italian cuisine in the 19th century. There is more than the history of Italian cuisine in the 17th, 18th and 19th century. Listen on.